SingleDad missed the last bus. A woman pulled over and everything changed. The street was quiet. Too quiet for the city. Neon signs buzzed above a shuttered deli, casting flickers of pale red across the sidewalk. A distant siren howled then faded. The cold bit harder as midnight crept closer. Caleb Morris sat on a metal bench that hadn't been warm in months. His coat was too thin, and the beanie he wore had a tear near the top, the kind of rip you kept ignoring because other things always mattered more. While his 7-year-old daughter, Sophie, had curled into a ball under his arm, her little legs tucked up, her cheek pressed against his chest. She was asleep, and the bus wasn't coming. Caleb checked his phone again. No battery, no apps, no ride share. He sighed. "I'm sorry, Soph," he whispered, brushing a strand of her hair back beneath her knit hat. "We'll figure something out." They'd been to a second job dishwashing at a late-night diner. He never meant to stay past 10, but someone didn't show up. Again. Sophie had waited in the back, coloring on napkins, smiling when he looked over, always smiling. He stood slowly, shifting her weight, then sat again. The streets were too empty to walk. His feet ached. He hadn't eaten dinner. Again. Then headlights, bright and silent. A black car slowed at the intersection. Caleb's body tensed. He instinctively pulled Sophie closer. The sedan's window rolled down just enough to see the silhouette of a woman inside. She wore something tailored, a dark coat, a glint of earrings. Her voice when it came was calm, clear and direct. "Do you need a ride?" Caleb blinked. "Excuse me?" The woman tilted her head slightly. "You've been sitting here for 40 minutes. Your daughter's asleep." "It's cold. I can take you where you need to go." "I'm fine," Caleb replied automatically. She nodded. "You don't have to trust me, but I have a driver. You'd be in the back seat." Her voice softened. "I know what it's like, when everything feels like it's just stopped." He didn't answer. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "I have a daughter too. She's older now, but I remember that age." Sophie stirred. She mumbled something in her sleep about pancakes. The woman smiled. Something about her wasn't dangerous, not slick, not pitying, just calm, grounded, a little sad. Caleb stood slowly, adjusting Sophie in his arms. "Where are you headed?" he asked. She met his eyes. "Wherever you need to go." The interior of the car smelled faintly of cedar wood and something expensive Caleb couldn't name. The leather seats were soft, the warmth immediate. A quiet instrumental played through hidden speakers, classical maybe, but low enough to feel like background breath. Sophie stirred again, mumbling something about sprinkles. Caleb adjusted her gently in his arms. The woman, Eleanor, as he would soon learn, didn't ask questions. She simply nodded to the driver through the mirrored divider, and the car pulled away from the curb like it floated. No one spoke for the first few blocks. Caleb's mind spun trying to decipher this. Wealth, elegance, grace. Why was someone like her offering rides to strangers, but he wasn't ungrateful? Just tired, suspicious, protective. Eleanor broke the silence with something unexpected. "You sing to her when you think no one's listening." Caleb looked over sharply. "What in the diner kitchen?" she said softly. "I was there, 2 tables back, waiting for a client who never showed. I saw you give her crayons. I heard you sing the silly syrup song." A pause. She smiled like she trusted the world. Caleb looked down at Sophie, who was now curled against him in sleep. "I didn't know anyone was watching," he said. "People like you don't expect to be." Eleanor replied, turning to the window. Her reflection looked distant. "That's what makes you rare." Caleb studied her. Expensive coat, perfect nails, posture, like she'd been trained to hold a secret. Yet something about her seemed frayed. Quiet, not rehearsed but restrained. "Who are you?" he asked. She gave a half smile. "Someone who remembers what it's like to feel lost." The car turned toward the east side. "You can drop us near 112th, Caleb said. "The bodega's still open. We'll walk from there." Eleanor glanced at him. You don't trust me. Oh, he said, I don't know you, and yet you're in my car. You're the first person who stopped. For a moment, she didn't reply. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a simple cream-colored card. No title, no phone number, just a name in small serif font, Eleanor D. She tucked it into the pocket of Sophie's jacket as if it belonged there. When the car pulled to a gentle stop, Eleanor didn't offer goodbye. She just said, take care of her. And yourself. Caleb opened the door. Cold rushed in again. He looked back once before stepping out. Eleanor was watching him, and for a moment, just a flicker, he saw something behind her eyes. Not pity, recognition. Then the door closed, and the car melted back into the city. The apartment was still dark when Caleb unlocked the door. It was small, 2 rooms, a flickering kitchen light, and a heater that rattled like it had secrets of its own. But it was theirs. After months in shelters, borrowed couches, and whispered apologies, this place, cracked and crooked, was finally home. He laid Sophie gently on the pull-out couch, tucking her under her unicorn blanket. She didn't stir. Caleb exhaled for the first time in hours. He slipped off his coat, rubbed the warmth back into his fingers, and turned toward the counter. That's when he saw it. An envelope, cream-colored, heavy paper, sitting next to a small paper bag labeled "For Morning." Inside the envelope was a note. You didn't ask for anything. So I left something anyway. For her breakfast. Or yours. Don't feel small for needing help. Sometimes people just want to give it, ED. Caleb stared at it. There were no instructions, no contact info, just a folded $100 bill tucked inside. His first instinct was anger. He wasn't a charity case. But then his eyes drifted to Sophie still curled up, breathing slow thumb loosely in her hand. Tomorrow she'd wake up hungry. There were 2 eggs and a box of stale cereal left in the cupboard. His hand tightened around the bill, then loosened. He opened the paper bag. 2 warm breakfast sandwiches, real bacon, fresh croissants, and a little juice box labeled Berry Blast with a cartoon dragon on the side. Sophie's favorite. Caleb sat down at the table and let his head drop into his hands. He didn't cry. Not really. But his shoulders shook for a long, quiet minute. Morning came with the sound of tiny feet. Daddy Sophie's voice was sleepy. Did the bus come? No, Caleb said, standing to greet her. But we got a ride from a nice lady. Sophie looked confused, then spotted the juice box. Her face lit up. You bought Berry Blast? He smiled faintly. Not exactly. She held it up like it was treasure. She was nice. Caleb nodded, though something about that sentence stayed with him. Not kind nice, safe, familiar, gentle. Not something Caleb often associated with strangers in black sedans. As Sophie ate, Caleb turned the note over in his hands again. There was no contact info, just the initials. ED. Who the hell was she, and why did he want to see her again? It was just past noon when the knock came. 3 soft taps. Not urgent, not official, but enough to set Caleb on edge. He rarely got visitors, and never unannounced. He looked at Sophie still in her pajamas, humming to herself as she colored a dragon in blue and gold and pressed a finger to his lips. She nodded solemnly. Ninja quiet, she whispered. Caleb opened the door slowly and froze. Eleanor, but not like before. Gone was the sharp black coat and perfect posture. Today she wore a faded navy sweater jeans and her hair pulled back in a loose braid. No makeup, no jewelry. She looked ordinary and more human. Hi, she said, her voice quieter than he remembered. I wasn't sure if I'd be interrupting. Caleb blinked. You found us. She gave a sheepish smile. I left that note. Didn't think you'd use the money, but figured I'd check. Caleb hesitated. Why Eleanor didn't answer right away. She shifted slightly, glancing past him into the apartment. Then she surprised him. Because I'm tired of being the one who disappears. Something in her voice cracked at the edges. She wasn't just checking in. She wasn't here to drop off more food or money. She looked like someone standing at the edge of a truth she hadn't said out loud yet. He opened the door wider. "Come in." She stepped inside carefully as if the walls might judge her. Sophie looked up and beamed. Juice Lady Eleanor blinked, then smiled. "That's me." Sophie held up her dragon. "Want to help color his wings?" Caleb watched the way Eleanor paused, visibly caught off guard by the invitation. Then she crouched beside the small table and picked up a yellow crayon like it was something fragile. "Sure," she whispered. "I haven't done this in a long time." They colored in silence for a while, Sophie dictating the rules of dragon fashion, and Caleb made coffee more out of habit than courtesy. When he finally sat across from Eleanor, she looked up and said, "I'm not who I looked like last night." He didn't reply, waiting. "I didn't lie," she added, "but I also didn't explain. And now you want to?" She nodded. "Not everything. Just maybe a little. Enough to stop pretending I'm okay." Caleb studied her. She looked like someone who had spent a long time being strong in public and breaking in private. He knew that feeling. He saw it in the mirror every morning. Sophie interrupted with her usual timing. "My daddy sings when I'm sad. You want a song?" Eleanor's eyes glistened. Caleb cleared his throat and shook his head with a smile. "Maybe later, sweetheart." Eleanor glanced at him, half grateful, half curious. "You sing I do a lot of things," he said softly. "None of them fancy." She smiled again. This time it didn't feel guarded. "I could use less fancy," she said. And for the first time, Caleb believed she meant it. Evening came quickly. The apartment was dim-lit mostly by the golden flicker of the kitchen light and the soft blue glow from Sophie's dragon-shaped night lamp. The world outside was still wet from a light rain, the windows speckled with droplets that shimmered like tiny stars. Eleanor stood near the front door, her coat folded over her arm, hesitating. Caleb cleared a few dishes, trying to ignore the question hovering in the room. He felt it in the way she lingered like a guest, unsure if she was still welcome. Finally, she spoke. "Would it be terribly inappropriate if I asked to stay the night?" Caleb looked up, startled. "Not," she rushed to clarify. "Not with you. I mean, just on the couch. I don't want to take advantage. She stopped. And then with rare vulnerability, "I don't want to go back out there yet." Caleb studied her. Her eyes were tired in a way makeup couldn't hide. The kind of tired that sleep alone didn't fix. He should have said no. Should have told her this wasn't a hotel, that he had a daughter, that she was a stranger. But Sophie had already wrapped her arms around Eleanor's leg. "Will you read me a story?" she asked, yawning. "Daddy always skips the fun voices." Eleanor gave Caleb a look. "That true?" He raised a brow. "I plead the fifth." Sophie pulled out her dragon book. "You can do the fire-breathing voice?" Eleanor laughed gently, and in that moment Caleb knew his answer. One night he said, "Couch only. I don't have extra blankets, but we've got a soft throw." She didn't argue, just nodded grateful. That night, Caleb watched as Eleanor read Sophie to sleep, voice shifting with each character, drawing tiny giggles from under the covers. He stood at the doorway, arms crossed, heart unsure. There was something unsettling about how right it felt. And as he turned out the lights, leaving Eleanor wrapped in a throw blanket on the couch, he told himself it was just one night. But something in his chest already knew this woman wasn't passing through. She was part of the story now. The next morning came softly. Sophie had already left for school with her favorite pink umbrella and a peanut butter sandwich in her backpack. Caleb, after walking her to the bus stop, returned to find Eleanor sitting cross-legged on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. She hadn't touched the tea he left. Sunlight streamed in through the curtains, illuminating the dust in the air, and the war happening behind Eleanor's calm face. He poured her a fresh mug. "Rough night," she blinked and tried to smile. No worse than usual. But Caleb had heard her around 3 a.m. shuffling. A choked breath. Something that sounded suspiciously like a sob muffled by a pillow. Now her hands fidgeted in her lap, her jaw tight, eyes wide and distant. "I should go," she whispered. "Go where he asked," gently. She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out a worn envelope from her coat pocket. It was thick, creased, stained with water. The flap was torn and folded in like shed, opened it and reopened it a dozen times. Without looking at him, she pushed it across the coffee table. He hesitated. "You want me to read this?" She gave a single nod. Inside were news clippings, torn headlines, names circled in red, photos from events here in a shimmering black gown beside powerful men all smiling for cameras. One article headline read, "Dynacore heiress to take board seat amid ethics scandal." Another, "Merger rumors swirl around Eleanor Delacourt. Public silence continues." Caleb looked up, brows drawn. "That's you." She nodded slowly like it hurt. "My father built the company. My brother ran it into fire. Now the board wants to merge with a company that profits from tech that hurts people. I was supposed to approve it." Smile, shake hands, pretend it was strategy. She pressed a fist to her mouth. Her breathing had quickened. "And you didn't. I left the gala an hour before the vote. Ditched security. Took back alleys. Ended up in that rain. That's when you..." She broke off. Her fingers trembled now. Her whole body vibrating with something he recognized instantly: panic. Caleb moved instinctively. He sat beside her, not close enough to crowd, but near enough that she could feel he wasn't going anywhere. "Breathe," he said softly. "Here, match me." He placed his hand on his chest and inhaled slow and deep. 1, 2, 3. Eleanor tried. Shakily, her shoulders heaved. A sob broke loose. "I can't," she gasped. "They'll find me. They'll drag me back. They'll lose who I am again." "No, you won't." He spoke it with a calm certainty, the same way he told Sophie the monsters under her bed were afraid of her. "You're safe here. Just breathe." For a few minutes they said nothing, just air and pulse and silence. Then slowly her hand reached across the couch cushion, fingers curling around his. Her grip was small, strong, shaking. "Why are you being kind to me?" she whispered. He gave her the only answer that made sense, because someone should have been a long time ago. It was nearly midnight when the truth came out. The apartment had settled into a peaceful hush. Sophie was asleep, her tiny nightlight flickering softly through the half-open bedroom door. The rain had returned, drizzling gently against the windows, like a lullaby no one was listening to. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, her long sleeves pulled over her hands. Her tea had gone cold hours ago. Caleb leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching her with a quiet patience that invited honesty, not demanded it. She'd been staring at a napkin for 10 minutes, folding and unfolding it. Finally, she spoke. "My full name is Eleanor Catherine Delacourt." Caleb didn't flinch. She looked up, searching his face. "That doesn't mean anything to you?" "I've heard the name," he said carefully. "Didn't want to assume." Eleanor gave a short, brittle laugh. "That's rare. Most people can't wait to assume." She set the napkin down and exhaled. "My father founded Delacourt Group. My brother ran it after he died, and I was the family legacy no one saw coming." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You're the one that vanished before the board vote, merged tech companies, whispers about ethics and sabotage." "That Eleanor." She nodded. "The one who ran." He didn't look shocked. That almost startled her more. "And now," he asked, "are you still running?" Eleanor's jaw tightened. She looked toward the window, eyes distant. "I don't know. Maybe I'm just..." Pausing. She turned back to him. "They were going to use me to rubber stamp a merger with a surveillance firm that violates every value we said we stood for. And the board didn't care. Public image, shareholder trusted, was all just theater." Her voice cracked. "I stood in that ballroom, all glass and diamonds and champagne, and I realized I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was being swallowed by something I helped build." She wiped her eyes quickly. "So I left. I walked out the back. No guards, no drivers. Just a coat and a chargerless phone." Caleb stepped closer. "Why tell me now?" Eleanor looked up at him. There was no makeup tonight, no armor, just her. Because you looked at me and didn't see a scandal, or a title, or something to control. She bit her lip. You saw someone lost, and you didn't ask for anything back. A long silence settled between them. Caleb finally pulled out the chair across from her. Sat down. You want to stay lost, he asked. No, she whispered. I want to be found, just not by them. He nodded slowly. Then let's figure it out. One step at a time. You'd help me, she asked, stunned. He shrugged. You read Sophie bedtime stories and dragon voices. That puts you pretty high on the list. She let out a soft, shaky laugh. And for the first time since that rainy night at the bus stop, Eleanor Delacourt, CEO's daughter-missing heiress, frightened woman felt seen. Not for who she was, but for who she might be. Morning came with a heavy sky. Gray light spilled through the windows, muted by thick clouds. Somewhere in the city, a siren wailed distantly. But inside the apartment, the silence was heavier, thicker, like it was holding its breath. Eleanor stood by the door, her coat folded over one arm, her phone clutched tightly in the other. The screen still glowed faintly with the news update Caleb had shown her just minutes ago. Delacourt heiress, allegedly cited in Queens, security, mobilized. She hadn't said much after that, just quietly begun gathering her things. Now her hand hovered near the doorknob. I should go, she said more to herself than anyone else. I can't bring trouble here. Caleb stood across the room, still and unreadable. He wanted to stop her, but he also knew people like her had been chased their whole lives. Chased by headlines, by expectations, by everyone wanting something. He didn't want to become another person pulling on her sleeve. But someone else did. No came a small voice behind them. Sophie. She stood in the hallway in her oversized pajamas, hair a tangle of sleep, eyes wide with confusion and fear. You're leaving, Lena knelt slowly, heart already cracking. Sophie, weak girl, I have to. It's complicated. The child stepped closer, shaking her head hard. But you made pancakes and voices, and you're not scary. You're nice, Eleanor swallowed hard, her vision blurred. I'm not who you think I am. I don't care, Sophie whispered. You smiled at me, like my mom used to. That broke something inside her. Tears slid silently down Eleanor's cheeks as Sophie reached out and wrapped her arms around her neck. Please don't go. Caleb stepped forward, then voice low but steady. You don't have to disappear, Eleanor. Not again. We'll figure something out. We don't need your last name. Just let us know your first one means something. She looked between them, this man who had never asked for anything, and his daughter who gave love like it was sunlight. For the first time in days, she stopped running, not out of fear, but out of choice. Slowly, she dropped her bag to the floor. I'm tired, she said, voice trembling. Tired of always leaving. Caleb gave a quiet nod. Then stay. And as the door stayed closed behind her, Eleanor Delacourt, the woman the world was searching for, sat down at the breakfast table in a worn-out hoodie beside a little girl and a single dad, and breathed. Not just to survive, but to begin again. By nightfall, they were gone. Caleb didn't ask for details. Eleanor didn't offer many. But the moment a black SUV had passed twice down their street that morning, slow, deliberate, something inside both of them agreed it was time. He made a single call. An old friend from his electrician days had a cabin 2 hours north, tucked between pine trees, and silence. No cell service. No reporters. No guards. Just wind, wood smoke, and enough peace to remember how to exhale. They packed light, just essentials, Sophie's favorite bedtime book, and a bag of groceries. Eleanor didn't even bring makeup. She left behind the clothes that made her Eleanor Delacourt and packed the worn hoodie she'd slept in on Caleb's couch. As the car climbed higher into the hills, the city lights fell away like a bad dream. Sophie slept most of the ride, her head in Eleanor's lap, thumb in her mouth. Eleanor stared out the window. You really think this is okay? She asked at one point, voice low. Caleb glanced at her. No cell towers, no cameras, no boardrooms, no pressure. Yeah, I think it's more than okay. When they pulled up to the cabin, it was nearly midnight. The porch light flickered on with a warm hum. A wind chime danced in the breeze. Inside, the space smelled like cedar and old stories. The fireplace was already stacked. A note on the counter read, "Use whatever you need. You deserve a break." It wasn't signed. Eleanor walked in slowly like the house might vanish if she moved too fast. "It's beautiful," she whispered. In quiet, I forgot what quiet feels like. Caleb gave her a smile. Up here, the loudest thing is the wind arguing with the trees. That night, they didn't talk about the company, or the news, or what came next. They cooked grilled cheese on the stovetop. Sophie insisted they all sit on the floor and eat by flashlight like an indoor camping trip. Eleanor laughed, really laughed for the first time in days. And later, after Sophie had fallen asleep curled beside the fire, Eleanor stood barefoot on the porch staring up at a sky she hadn't seen in years. Stars. So many stars. Caleb joined her. Quiet, present. She didn't have to say it, but she did. "Thank you." He looked at her. "For what?" "For reminding me I'm allowed to be human." The wind carried her words away, but he heard them. And standing side by side beneath a sky that didn't care about headlines, money, or power, they shared a silence that said, "For now, this is enough." They didn't speak about the city, not the news, not the headlines, not the fact that Eleanor Delacourt was still technically missing. For 3 precious days, the world outside didn't exist. The mornings began with pancakes, the messy, imperfect kind, with uneven edges and too much syrup. Caleb cooked while Sophie sang songs about blueberries and dragons. Eleanor sat barefoot at the counter, hair in a soft braid, laughing more easily now. She offered to help, but Caleb shook his head. "You've had enough boardroom breakfast. Let me ruin this one properly." Day 1, they splashed through a muddy trail after the rain, Sophie shrieking with joy as her boots got soaked. Eleanor chased her with a towel only to lose her balance and fall in two. They came back to the cabin dripping, laughing like old friends, not like fugitives from 2 very different worlds. Day 2, Caleb found an old guitar tucked in a closet. He strummed a clumsy melody by the fire that night, while Eleanor read Sophie a fairy tale. At one point, Sophie yawned mid-sentence and curled against Eleanor's side. "You smell like pine cones and pancakes," the little girl mumbled. Eleanor blinked hard, holding the child closer than she meant to. Day 3, no one checked their phones. No one cared about schedules. They baked cookies with flour everywhere, watched birds from the window, and lit candles just because Sophie said the cabin needed a little magic. And somewhere between the burnt batch of oatmeal raisin and Sophie falling asleep with her hand in Eleanor's, something inside Eleanor Delacourt softened. Unlocked. She had spent years learning how to be perfect. But here in this creaky cabin with mismatched mugs, the smell of firewood, and 2 people who didn't want anything from her, she was finally learning how to be real. "Do you think it's okay?" she asked Caleb that night, "to want this, even if it can't last?" He looked at her, not with pity, but with knowing. "I think it's not just okay," he said. "I think it's the bravest thing you've done." She closed her eyes, not because she was tired, but because for the first time in a long time she felt safe enough to rest. The 4th morning broke colder. Eleanor awoke early, long before Sophie's soft breaths shifted beneath the blankets. She pulled on Caleb's flannel and stepped barefoot onto the cabin porch. The air was sharp, the sky just beginning to pink at the edges. For a while, all she heard was birdsong and wind. But inside on the counter, the silence was broken. The old battery-powered radio left on accidentally the night before buzzed to life. A news anchor's voice crackled through the static. Delacroix Enterprises continues to issue no comment on Eleanor's whereabouts. Rumors have swirled since her sudden absence before last week's shareholder meeting. Eleanor froze. Caleb stepped out behind her, coffee in hand, watching her. "I didn't mean to leave it on," he said softly. She gave a faint smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "It's okay. The world was always going to catch up." She listened quietly as the announcer continued. A new wave of speculation points to a nervous breakdown, though unconfirmed sources suggest she may be deliberately avoiding a forced merger with Nexus Global. Investors are nervous. The board remains divided. They talk like I'm a myth, Eleanor said bitterly, like I'm a market shift. Caleb leaned against the railing. They've never known you as a person. Just a last name. She nodded, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. The quiet here, the joys of the last 3 days, it had been real. But so was the world waiting beyond the trees. And people were talking. I can't stay hidden forever. No, Caleb said, but maybe now you know you don't have to go back the same way you left. She looked at him. Do you think people will believe me that I left because I couldn't breathe? Some won't, but the ones who matter will. Eleanor took a long breath, the kind that didn't hitch in her throat anymore. She'd wanted silence. Now she'd had it. She'd tasted something more powerful than power peace. And because of it, she felt strong enough to return, not as the headline they'd shaped her into, but as herself. Inside, the radio continued murmuring market numbers. But Eleanor turned away, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to disappear, it's to come back changed. The fire had burned low. Sophie had gone to sleep hours earlier, curled up on the couch with her stuffed rabbit, the remnants of marshmallow on her chin. Outside, the wind tapped against the windows like a distant reminder of the world they were hiding from. Inside, Eleanor sat cross-legged on the rug facing the hearth. Her fingers absently traced the rim of her tea mug. She hadn't spoken for a while. Caleb didn't press. He sat a few feet away, letting the silence breathe, the kind of silence that invites truth rather than demands it. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Do you know what I was supposed to sign the night I disappeared? Caleb turned slightly. Something at your company? She nodded, eyes fixed on the glowing embers. It was a merger. Dynacore and Nexus Global. My father's final deal, a legacy move. It would have made us the largest private media conglomerate in the Western Hemisphere. Billions in assets, full control of several national news channels, data platforms, even tech subsidiaries. She paused. The fire crackled, quiet and unforgiving. But in the fine print, I found something. We were about to gut our own ethical media division, the last team still doing real journalism, the kind that actually told the truth. She looked at Caleb now, her voice barely above a whisper. They were going to shut it down quietly, transfer all investigative funding to AI-driven media, silence the whistleblower protection program. No one would notice, except I did, and if I signed, it'd be the one holding the match. Caleb's jaw tensed. He didn't say, I'm sorry. He didn't say, it's not your fault. He let her keep going. I tried to speak up. In the final meeting, I was shut down, told I was being emotional, unstable, that I needed rest. So you left. I ran, she corrected. I left a multi-million-dollar deal on the table, a room full of executives, a security team outside, and I walked right into a convenience store, borrowed a charger from a stranger and sat in a booth shaking. Her voice trembled now, but she didn't cry. I didn't want to be the girl who signed away the truth. Caleb didn't try to fix it. He just said the words she needed most. Then you're not. She looked up at him, startled. You're the girl who walked away, who protected something when no one else would. That matters. Eleanor blinked hard. You think so, I know so. Sophie knows so, and I think the world deserves to hear it, not from a headline, but from you. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air felt heavy and clean like after rain. Then Eleanor exhaled, not in defeat but in relief, because finally she wasn't carrying the truth alone. The snow had started to fall just after breakfast. By mid-afternoon, the woods around the cabin were blanketed in a soft, white stillness. Sophie had begged to go outside, and with 3 layers of scarf and the firm rule of no snow in the boots. This time, Caleb agreed. Eleanor joined them, a little hesitant, still unused to the quiet freedom of it all. They followed a narrow trail behind the cabin until the trees opened to a small clearing and a frozen lake. The surface shimmered beneath the gray sky untouched. Sophie, fearless, ran ahead. "Look, it's a mirror," Caleb chuckled, calling after her. "Stay close to the edge, kiddo." Eleanor stood at the tree line, her boots crunching the snow. She stared at the frozen lake, something tightening in her chest. "You okay?" Caleb asked gently. She nodded, though her voice came quiet. "It's beautiful. I don't trust things that look too perfect anymore." Sophie ran in circles on the ice's edge, her laughter echoing. Caleb moved toward her. Eleanor lingered at the shoreline, then slowly took a step forward. The first footfall was solid, then the second. She ventured out farther than she meant to, just enough to forget the rules Caleb had said. And then crack. It was faint, a whisper beneath her feet, but unmistakable. Eleanor froze. The world tilted. Another crack. Caleb's voice shot through the air. She couldn't move. Her breath caught. The ground felt like glass beneath her. Then he was there. Caleb's boots pounded the edge of the lake. He didn't think. He just reached out, grabbed her arm and pulled. Hard. She stumbled forward into him, just as the ice behind her groaned again. They landed in a heap on the snow. Eleanor shaking Caleb, holding her like she might vanish. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I wasn't thinking." "You don't have to be sorry," he said, breathless. "You just have to be okay." They stayed there for a moment, his arms around her, her fingers clutched in his coat, the wind swirling snow around them. She looked up at him. His eyes weren't panicked. They were soft, steady. "You caught me," she said quietly. "You were never falling," he replied, "just drifting a little far." Their breath hung in the cold air, two clouds brushing. In the distance, Sophie called, "Are you guys kissing or what?" They both burst out, laughing, the fear dissolving into something warmer. Later, back at the cabin, Eleanor would catch herself looking at Caleb's hands, the ones that had pulled her back, not just from the ice, but from everything she'd been drowning in for years. And for the first time, she wondered if she could let herself stay. The cabin was warm, filled with the soft crackle of firewood and the buttery scent of pancakes still clinging to the air. Caleb was washing dishes at the sink, humming something low and familiar, sleeves rolled up. Eleanor sat on the rug cross-legged, her hair still damp from snowmelt. Across from her, Sophie was busy dressing her stuffed rabbit in a doll-sized scarf. It had been a peaceful day, a real one, not borrowed, not staged, just lived. Eleanor had laughed and actually laughed when Sophie slipped and flung flour everywhere while helping with breakfast. She had sat curled on the couch beside Caleb while they watched cartoons she didn't understand, and she had caught herself smiling when she forgot the rest of the world existed. She was starting to believe she could belong here. Maybe. Then Sophie looked up from her bunny and asked, as simply as a child asks for more juice, "Can she stay forever?" Caleb paused mid-rinse, his hands still in the sink. Eleanor didn't answer, because her throat closed. The room seemed to hold its breath. Sophie was still watching her, those big, trusting eyes wide and innocent, filled with the kind of love that didn't understand terms like temporary or complicated. "I like her," Sophie said. "She makes pancakes weird but good, and she reads the voices right. You do too many accents, Daddy." Caleb smiled faintly, not looking up. Eleanor blinked. Hard. Once. Twice. But the tears still came. She hadn't cried like this, not even the night she left everything behind. Not when she abandoned a penthouse view boardroom, power her name, her entire carefully built world. But now sitting on a rug with a child who just wanted her to stay, something inside cracked. She covered her mouth, but the sob escaped anyway. Caleb turned instantly, drying his hands and kneeling beside her. Hey, it's okay," he whispered. "You don't have to. I want to..." Eleanor choked. "That's the problem. I want to stay, and I can't." Sophie looked confused. Why not? Eleanor tried to answer, but no words came. Because how do you explain to a child that the world doesn't let people like her disappear, that wealth and legacy and media headlines don't just let go? Caleb touched her hand. You don't have to figure it out today. But it's coming, isn't it? Eleanor whispered. The end of this, Caleb didn't lie. He just squeezed her fingers gently. Sophie scooted closer and climbed into Eleanor's lap as if it was the most obvious place in the world to be. You don't have to stay forever, she said, just stay for now. And somehow those 3 words broke Eleanor's heart in the best way. Because for now, this fleeting, fragile real now was everything. The first sign was the sound of tires, not the usual hum of distant traffic or the crunch of snow from wildlife. This was sharp, heavy, deliberate. Caleb was chopping wood behind the cabin when he heard it. He looked up, breath fogging in the air, and saw them 2 black SUVs parked just beyond the tree line. No logos, no flashing lights, but unmistakable. Reporters. Or worse. He dropped the axe and ran for the door. Inside, Eleanor was just pouring tea. Sophie was tracing shapes on the frosted window, her laughter echoing through the warm wooden walls. Caleb stepped in fast. His face said everything. They're here, he said quietly. Eleanor went still. How does it matter? They found you. Outside, muffled voices grew clearer, crunching footsteps in the snow, camera shutters warming up. You and Sophie go into the back room, Caleb said quickly. I'll tell them to leave. Eleanor interrupted. She was already backing away from the table. Her hands were shaking. No, I can't do this again. I told you this was coming. Caleb stepped forward. We can talk to them. I can protect. You can't protect me from what comes next, she said, her voice raw. You're a single dad with a kind smile. I'm a story, a scandal. Sophie turned from the window, sensing the shift. What's going on? Eleanor bent quickly, hugged the little girl tight. You're the best part of this whole world, Sophie Mercer. Don't ever forget that. And then she was gone. No coat, no boots, just the hoodie Caleb had lent her days ago, her breath coming fast as she burst out the back door into the snow. Caleb shouted after her, but she didn't stop. She ran through the trees, her footprints vanishing behind her as the wind picked up. Cameras flashed from the front, reporters calling her name, but they were too late. She was already gone, and all she left behind was a steaming cup of untouched tea and a little girl staring at the door with tears in her eyes. The cabin was still, the kind of stillness that feels too quiet. Caleb stirred first. He blinked at the soft gray light leaking through the curtains, and for a second he forgot. He reached toward the other room instinctively, as if she might still be there wrapped in a borrowed blanket, half asleep on the couch. But her spot was cold, and the pillow was untouched. He sat up slowly. Eleanor, no answer. In the next room, Sophie's small voice called out, Daddy! He stood and walked to her. She was sitting up, her hair messy, hugging her stuffed rabbit. Is she making pancakes? He hesitated, then knelt. No, sweetheart. Sophie's eyes filled. She left, didn't she? Caleb nodded slowly, pressing a hand to her back. Yeah, last night. They sat in silence for a moment, both staring at the little wooden table in the kitchen. The mug Eleanor always used still sat beside the kettle. Her scarf was gone. So was the book she'd been reading. But something was there tucked beneath Sophie's drawing of a snowman. A note, written in Eleanor's delicate looping hand. Thank you for giving me something real. I don't know how to live in that world out there yet, but I'm going to try. Tell Sophie she made me laugh like a child again. And tell yourself you didn't fix me. You just saw me. That was enough. Sophie leaned against her father's arm. Do you think she'll come back? Caleb didn't answer right away, because hope was dangerous, but sometimes it was all you had. I don't know, he whispered. But I think we gave her something to come back to. And in the quiet morning light, they sat at the empty table, not broken, not abandoned, just waiting. Because love doesn't always knock. Sometimes it runs barefoot into the woods with nothing but a borrowed hoodie and finds its way home in time. The logo on the screen read, Live Delacroix Media Press Conference. The ticker below flashed. Eleanor Delacroix breaks her silence after 10 days missing. Caleb stared at the screen in his small living room. Sophie sat curled up beside him, silent. Even the TV seemed to hum softer than usual, as if the moment demanded it. Then she stepped out. Eleanor, hair pulled back, no makeup, no diamonds, just a dark blazer over a simple blouse, and a steadiness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A sea of reporters quieted. She stood behind the podium. Alone, no lawyers, no PR team, no handlers, just her. The flash of cameras didn't shake her. The whispers didn't sway her. She placed her hands on the podium and took a breath. I know what the headlines have said, that I vanished, that I was unstable, irresponsible, unfit for leadership. Her voice didn't shake. I've read words like meltdown, runaway, and fraud. A pause. But none of those words are true, and none of them matter now. A murmur rippled through the crowd. What matters is that for the first time in my life, I stopped performing. I stopped pretending to be the woman the world wanted me to be. And for a few quiet days, I remembered who I actually am. She looked directly into the lens of the camera. Caleb felt his breath catch. Sophie leaned forward. I'm not making excuses. I disappeared. I walked away from meetings, deals, a press tour, but in the process, I walked towards something else, something more human. Her gaze softened. Her voice dropped. I was taken in by a man who had no reason to help me. A single father raising a daughter who sings in the rain and draws snowmen on the floor. They fed me, protected me, and saw me. Not the last name, not the headlines, just me. Camera shutters flicked again. Eleanor steadied herself. I'm here to say I'm stepping down from the Delacroix board permanently, effective immediately, not because I'm weak, but because I finally know what real strength looks like. Another pause. The press froze. I don't need a tower of glass to feel seen. I don't need stock options to feel worthy. And I don't need a legacy to prove I exist. She smiled just barely, but it was real. To the man and little girl who reminded me of the world outside the spotlight. Thank you. I'll find my way back to you, if you'll have me. Then she stepped back from the mic. No applause, just silence, deep and reverent. Caleb didn't move. Sophie turned to him slowly, eyes wide. She means us right, Daddy? He couldn't speak. Not yet. Because for the first time in a long while, someone hadn't just made a speech. They'd told the truth. The morning was quieter than usual. Too quiet. The cabin felt hollow without Eleanor's humming in the kitchen, without the quiet clink of her stirring tea. Even the snow outside seemed to fall more slowly, like the world knew someone was missing from it. Caleb stood by the window, his coffee cold in his hand. He hadn't slept. Not really. He kept thinking about her last smile, the sound of her laugh, when Sophie had balanced a pancake on her head. The way her eyes had softened when Sophie asked, can she stay forever? And then she was gone. No note this time, no goodbye, just gone. Behind him, Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, crayons scattered around her, her little tongue peeking out in concentration. She was working hard, furiously scribbling color across paper. What you making, Bug? Caleb asked, gently setting his mug down and kneeling beside her. She looked up with serious eyes. It's for Eleanor. So she doesn't forget. She turned the paper toward him. A picture of the cabin. The three of them out front, stick figures smiling wide. Eleanor had a crown of purple stars over her curly hair. She said she liked purple, Sophie whispered. So I gave her a sky of it. Caleb swallowed hard, his voice thick. She's not going to forget you, but we don't know where she is, Sophie said softly. She looked sad when she left. He paused, looked around at the cozy little cabin. The chipped mug, the blanket she had folded before vanishing. The silence that felt too loud. Then he stood. No, he said firmly, we don't know where she is, but we know where she might go. Sophie blinked. We're going after her? Caleb smiled. No, we're going to remind her there's something to come back to. A few hours later, Manhattan. The streets of the city were wet with slush. Caleb held Sophie's hand tightly as they weaved through crowds and honking taxis. In his coat pocket was Sophie's drawing carefully folded. On his chest was a hope he didn't know how to name. They stood across from Delacroix Tower, glass steel, and a rotating door that never stopped spinning. He hesitated. She was probably gone. Maybe back in hiding. Maybe flying across the world. But then the doors opened. Eleanor stepped out. She looked different. Still elegant, still striking, but softer, warmer. More like the woman who had made shadow puppets on a cabin wall than the one who once owned a boardroom. She froze when she saw them, and for a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Sophie ran forward, mittened hands outstretched, and pressed the folded picture into Eleanor's hands. "I made it for you," she said, breathless, "in case you forgot." Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened it. 3 smiling stick figures. 1 tiny crown of purple stars. Her voice cracked as she knelt to hug the little girl who had changed her life. "I didn't forget," she whispered. "I couldn't." Caleb stepped closer. "We didn't know what you needed. I didn't either." She replied, tears in her eyes. "But now I do." She looked up at him. "I needed this. You, her. Pancakes and crayons in a place where I could be seen." Then she laughed softly, tears falling freely. "I thought I had lost my world," she said. "But maybe I was just meant to find another one." The elevator chimed. Heads turned as Eleanor Delacroix stepped out, not in diamonds or designer armor, but in a dark coat and rain-damp curls, carrying a thick leather folder under her arm and a quiet storm in her eyes. Her heels struck the marble like a metronome of intent. Whispers followed her like shadows. "She's back." "What is she doing here?" She resigned. No, she escaped. The boardroom doors were already open. Inside, 12 executives sat like stone sculptures under fluorescent light. A projection glowed against the wall numbers, mergers of future she had once been pressured to sign away. At the head of the table sat Victor Lang, interim chairman, and the man who had once called her exhausted in a press leak. He stood when she entered. "Eleanor, you're not scheduled for—" "I don't need to be," she said evenly, walking straight to the head of the table. "I was born scheduled for this room." She placed the folder in front of him and opened it with a single steady motion. "This is a full audit of every deal you've attempted in my absence, including the one that would have handed over our ethics division to Virex Solutions in exchange for a personal seat on their board." Victor's jaw clenched. "I didn't approve any of that," she continued, "but I will be undoing it." "You don't have the votes," someone muttered. Eleanor turned to face them, all eyes like cut glass. "Maybe not today, but this board will have a choice publicly, transparently, and I'm not asking you to believe in me anymore." She held up Sophie's drawing, carefully unfolded and taped into the corner of her folder. "I'm asking you to believe in what we could be." There was a pause. A long one, but then someone at the far end of the table, one of the newer members, a quiet woman from legal, cleared her throat. "You have mine." Eleanor blinked, and then one by one, hesitant hands raised. Victor's face drained of color. Eleanor straightened her spine. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply gathered her papers, nodded to the room, and said, "Let's begin again." The sky over Manhattan was low and gray, the kind of cold that slipped beneath collars and stung fingers. Caleb stood across the street from Delacroix Tower, Sophie on his shoulders wrapped tight in her puffy pink coat. The crowd had thickened, reporters, camera crews, a swarm of curious onlookers, all facing the building as if waiting for something monumental to emerge. And it would. Caleb knew that much. Not because of the tower, not because of the legacy tied to the name carved in steel above the entrance, but because of her. From the sidewalk, he couldn't see inside the boardroom, but he could hear the murmurs around him. She brought documentation, real numbers. She shut Victor Lang down like a CEO and a mother bear. Some say she's putting the ethics division back in play under her terms. Caleb smiled softly. Sophie leaned down over his forehead. "Daddy, yeah, bug. Do you think she saw my picture?" He reached up, touching her small hand. I think she carries it in her heart. They watched as more people crowded toward the glass. Suddenly, the lobby doors parted. Reporters surged forward, camera flashes bursting like fireworks, but no one emerged. Just a glimpse of her silhouette through the glass. Sophie whispered, "Is that her?" "It is." She leaned her cheek against his head. Caleb didn't move. He didn't wave, didn't shout. He just stood, steady-grounded, the man who offered a stranger a ride, a place to breathe, and never once asked for anything back. And somewhere upstairs, Eleanor stood taller because of that, because of him, because sometimes the greatest acts of love are the quietest. And the people who change your life never need a title to prove they did. The boardroom was silent, not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the sharp, unnatural kind, like the seconds before a thunderclap. Eleanor stood at the head of the table, her hands resting calmly on a leather folder. But her voice, when it came, was anything but calm. "You didn't just try to sell a division. You tried to sell me." Across the polished table, Victor Lang sat rigid, his lips pressed into a thin line. The other members shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor reached into the folder and pulled out a slim stack of documents. Emails, financial transfers, meeting minutes altered after I left. All of them signed, authorized, and stamped without my knowledge. She held one page in the air. This one here. It outlines a strategic partnership that would have dissolved our employee wellness program and replaced it with automated outsourcing under the guise of cost-saving innovation. Gasps from the newer members. In this, she held up another sheet, her voice tightening, a non-compete clause added to my resignation draft. "You were planning to silence me." Victor's mask slipped just for a moment, just enough to show the arrogance beneath. "You were overwhelmed, Eleanor. The company needed stability." Her eyes locked onto his, cold and clear. "No, Victor. The company needed decency. You offered it a deal with the devil instead." She turned to the others. "Some of you signed these papers. Some of you stayed silent. And I don't know which is worse. But today," her voice softened yet grew stronger, "you get to decide if you want to fix what's broken or bury it." Silence again, but this time it was heavier. Changing, a younger executive spoke up, voice trembling. "Why didn't you just run?" "I did," Eleanor answered simply, "but someone showed me I could walk back." Her fingers brushed the drawing Sophie had given her, now framed beside her notes. 3 stick figures, 1 purple crown, 1 ordinary man. Victor stood. "You can't just rewrite the narrative." "I'm not," she said, already gathering her papers. "I'm finally telling it myself." As she walked out of the room, the vote began. One by one, hands rose, and behind her, the empire began to change. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Caleb stepped out, feeling like he'd wandered into the wrong world. He straightened the collar of his cleanest shirt, the one he wore to Emma's parent-teacher nights, and held tightly to Sophie's drawing, now folded carefully in his coat pocket. The lobby receptionist had said, "They're expecting you," but he doubted anyone upstairs really was. As he entered the boardroom, the air grew colder. Sleek suits, watches that cost more than his rent, thin smiles that didn't reach eyes. Victor Lang was still there, arms folded. "Ah, the mechanic, or delivery man." "Which was it?" he said, voice laced with sarcasm. A ripple of laughter around the table. Controlled, dismissive. Caleb didn't flinch. "SingleDad," he said plainly. "That's the only title I answer to." Someone near the far end muttered, "This is absurd." But Eleanor stood, not a word, just a nod, a quiet kind of trust. And in that moment, it was all Caleb needed. He walked to the front, no podium, no credentials, just a man who once missed the last bus and had everything change. He cleared his throat. "I don't know your world. I can't quote margins or projections. I can't tell you what your investors want, but I know what people need. Silence. They need to feel safe, to be seen, To know their work means something, that they're not just pieces of a profit puzzle. He paused, unfolding Sophie's drawing. Your CEO. She didn't find herself again in a mirror. She found it sitting cross-legged on a worn-out rug, helping my daughter with finger paints and bedtime stories. A few expressions shifted, uncomfortable, thoughtful. You call it a breakdown. I call it breakthrough. Victor's voice cut in cool and sharp. You don't belong here, Mr. Fisher. Caleb turned to him, calm and unshaken. Neither did integrity, until she brought it back. Eleanor's eyes glistened, not tears, but something stronger, conviction. Caleb nodded, stepped back, and handed Sophie's drawing to her, for when they forget what matters. And with that, he left the room the same way he came, in quiet, grounded, ordinary. But in his wake, the room felt different, because sometimes it takes the simplest voice to remind the powerful what real strength looks like. The boardroom remained still after Caleb left. The echo of his words seemed to settle into the wood-paneled walls, more lasting than any numbers printed in the quarterly report stacked by the water pitchers. Victor cleared his throat, ready to retake control. Now that the theatrics are over, let's return to the matter of leadership. But his voice no longer held the same weight. Eleanor sat quietly, composed, her hands folded, Sophie's drawing just in view beside her folder. Then came the voice no one expected to break the silence. I side with Eleanor. Heads turned. Aria Chen, chief strategist, usually cautious to a fault, had spoken clearly, decisively. She removed her glasses. I read the documents. I know what this board did behind closed doors. But today I saw someone who walked through the fire and came back stronger. She looked at Eleanor. I vote to reinstate her with full authority. A pause, then another voice, an older board member, hesitant but firm. Same here. I don't want to explain to my granddaughter that I voted against the woman who finally stood up. A third, then a fourth. Momentum grew. Victor's jaw tightened. This is sentiment. It's not business. But Aria turned to him, unblinking. It's both. And if you can't see that, maybe it's time you step down. Eleanor didn't gloat, didn't even smile. She simply nodded. Let the record show I'm not here to burn bridges. But I will rebuild this company without the rot. When the final vote was counted, it was 83 in her favor. The shift had come, not because she played by their rules, but because she rewrote them. And this time, the board listened. The boardroom emptied slowly, like a theater after a heavy play. Chairs scraped back, papers were gathered. Eyes avoided hers, not out of disrespect, but something closer to awe. Eleanor remained seated. The vote was done. The reins were back in her hands. Dynacor was hers again. And yet she didn't feel triumphant. She felt hollow. Not broken, no. She was far beyond breaking. But tired. Deeply tired. Victor had left without a word, his resignation typed and delivered in silence. Aria Chen gave Eleanor a respectful nod on the way out. Well, follow your lead, she said softly. But leadership, Eleanor now understood, was not about power. It was about weight. She glanced down at the drawing Sophie had given her, 3 smiling stick figures under a blue sky. Caleb, Sophie, and her. No boardroom, no gold seal, just a feeling of belonging. Her fingers trembled. She didn't cry, not yet, but her breath caught in her throat. This was what winning looked like. A table full of people who once doubted her, now silent. A tower full of glass that no longer reflected who she really was. A company saved, but only because she'd first lost herself. A soft knock on the door startled her. It opened just enough for Caleb's face to appear warm, cautious. You okay? He asked gently. She looked at him. This man who had no title, no wealth, no reason to care, who had held her hand on a bad night and let her daughter draw castles around her name. Eleanor nodded. I won. Caleb stepped inside, closed the door behind him. I know, he said, but are you still you? She opened her mouth, paused, then whispered, I think I'm getting there. He offered his hand, not as a gesture of romance or rescue, just presence. And for the first time all day, Eleanor stood up, not to prove herself, but to come home to herself. The elevator ride down felt longer than the one going up. Eleanor stood beside Caleb in silence. The hum of the motor, the flicker of floor lights, her reflection in the mirrored walls, clean lines, steady posture, composed expression. But her hands told the truth. They clutched a sheet of paper now slightly crinkled at the corners, smudged where her thumb had lingered. Sophie's drawing, 3 figures, stick arms, a heart between them. The sun big and orange in the corner. When the elevator doors slid open, the lobby came into view, and with it, the storm waiting outside. Cameras, journalists, flashes popping like lightning. They were expecting a statement, a triumphant CEO, a soundbite to feed the headlines. But Eleanor didn't stop for the podium. She stepped into the light holding only the drawing. No speech, no PR team, just the paper in her hand and the quiet strength in her eyes. The crowd hushed. Even the reporters faltered, because they were looking for a woman in control, but what they saw was something rare. A woman at peace. Behind her, Caleb waited just inside the glass doors. He didn't chase her or wave. He simply watched steady present the way he always had. And as the wind lifted her hair and cameras clicked again, Eleanor took one last look at the tower behind her. The one she had once thought she needed to conquer. Now it was just a building. She glanced down at the drawing in her hand. That was the real legacy. She smiled, not for the cameras, for herself. Then she walked forward into the crowd, not as the CEO the world had demanded, but as Eleanor, free. Finally, it had been 3 weeks since the boardroom vote. 3 weeks since Eleanor Delacroix reclaimed her name and then walked away from it. The media had followed her every move for days. Speculation ran wild. Where is she now became the headline no one could answer. But Eleanor wasn't lost. She was finally finding her way. And on a breezy Sunday morning, she found herself standing at a familiar apartment door, slightly faded paint, a sunflower welcome mat. There were crayons on the windowsill inside, and the hum of a cartoon playing somewhere behind the door. She took a breath, raised her hand and knocked. Footsteps. The door opened. Caleb stood there in sweats, in an old t-shirt, coffee in hand, looking every bit like someone who hadn't expected the past to show up on his doorstep again. But when he saw her, he didn't blink. He just stepped aside and said softly, "You came back." She held up a box, small, no logo. Inside it, a hand-carved wooden birdhouse and a packet of seeds. "I don't have a job offer this time," she said, voice lighter than he'd ever heard it. "I'm not running. I'm not hiding." Her eyes searched his. "I want to build something real. And I think I want to start here." Caleb didn't say anything for a moment. Then from behind his legs came a small voice. Miss Ellie Sophie peeked around him, hair messy from sleep, blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. Eleanor knelt. "Hi, sunshine." Sophie's arms wrapped tight around her neck, no hesitation. Caleb watched them both. "You hungry?" he finally asked. "Starving," Eleanor said. "Then come in. We've got pancakes, no board meetings, just syrup and cartoons." She smiled. She stepped through the doorway. And as the door closed gently behind her, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. A real one. The scent of cinnamon and maple filled the kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the open window, catching on the dust motes like glitter. Somewhere outside, a bird chirped. Inside, the world felt slow, safe, real. Pancakes sizzled on the pan. Caleb flipped them with one hand while reaching for the orange juice with the other. Across the table, Sophie was laughing, not the polite kind, but the wild, messy, nose-wrinkled kind that made Eleanor's heart ache in the best way. There were crayons scattered on the floor. A bowl of oranges sat in the middle of the table, vibrant, unpeeled, glowing in the morning light. Eleanor reached for one without thinking, her sleeves pushed up her hair in a braid. No tailored suit, no assistant whispering about schedules, no meetings, no exit strategies, just breakfast and belonging. She glanced at Caleb as he slid another stack onto Sophie's plate. He caught her look. Woody said, a little smile tugging at his lips. She shook her head gently. Nothing, everything. Sophie pointed to the birdhouse Eleanor had brought weeks ago, now painted in rainbow colors, sitting proudly on the windowsill. A bird moved in, she said proudly. I saw it yesterday. Maybe it thinks this is home, Eleanor said softly. Sophie nodded. It is. No one said more for a while. They didn't need to. No one was running. Not from guilt, not from grief, not from pressure or titles or headlines. The only future that mattered was this moment. Warm pancakes, laughter, and oranges in a bowl. The classroom was quiet. Sunlight filtered through high windows. Rows of students listened as Sophie Carter, now 14, stood at the front of the room with her presentation notes held in one hand and a faint smile playing on her lips. The assignment had been simple. Tell a story that changed your life. But Sophie knew that some stories weren't just hers to tell, they belonged to the people who lived them with her. She looked up from the paper. Once she began, my dad missed a bus. A few classmates looked puzzled. It was cold and we were tired, and he tried really hard not to look scared. But he always tried hard for me. She paused, remembering. That night, a car pulled over. A woman offered us a ride. She was quiet. She wore heels she didn't know how to walk in. And I thought her eyes looked like a storm trying to clear. She turned the page slower now. She left behind a note and a $100 bill. A chuckle rippled through the class, but she came back. Not for the money, for us. She wasn't just someone in a car. She was Eleanor Delacroix. She used to run a company that owned buildings and screens and headlines. But the only thing she really wanted was a kitchen with pancakes and a birdhouse by the window. Sophie looked up again. I watched my dad teach her how to laugh again. And I watched her teach him how to trust someone new. She took a breath, steadied herself. That night didn't just change her, or him. It changed me. Her voice softened to a whisper, because I got to watch love come back from the edge. The room was still, then applause, soft at first and stronger. As she walked back to her seat, she caught the eye of someone near the door, a woman with silvering hair wearing no makeup, a quiet grace about her. Eleanor smiled. Caleb was beside her, a proud hand resting on hers. Sophie sat down and whispered under her breath, "Thanks for missing that bus, Dad."